Let me paint a picture for you. It's a Wednesday night in late June. The summer heat is oppressive, the kind that makes the air shimmer above the pavement outside the arena. Inside, the temperature is about to get even hotter. Two teams that had already gone to war just 48 hours earlier are lining up for round two. The Indiana Fever and the Phoenix Mercury. Two franchises with bad blood so fresh it hasn't even had time to scab over yet. Monday night's clash had produced 6 technical fouls and an ejection. It was the kind of game where every whistle felt like a provocation, where every screen felt personal, where the post-game handshake line carried more tension than most playoff series. Everyone in women's basketball knew what Wednesday night was going to be. The officials knew, the coaches knew, the players knew. The league office, sitting somewhere in their offices reviewing footage from 48 hours ago, absolutely knew. And yet what happened on that court in the second quarter of this game was so brazen, so flagrant, so utterly devoid of sportsmanship that it shattered through every expectation and landed like a bomb on the doorstep of a league that is running out of excuses, running out of patience from its fan base, and running out of time to get this right. Because what Alyssa Thomas did to Caitlin Clark on that floor wasn't basketball. It wasn't physicality. It wasn't toughness. It wasn't any of the words that people hide behind when they want to excuse something inexcusable. It was a deliberate, calculated, dangerous act against a defenseless player who was already on the ground, and the referee who was standing close enough to reach out and touch both players did absolutely nothing. This is the story of a cheap shot that broke the internet, a league that is failing its brightest star, and a reckoning that cannot be postponed any longer. This is the story of June 24th, 2026, the night that may very well define whether the WNBA rises to meet its moment or collapses under the weight of its own negligence. Settle in, this is going to take a while. To understand what happened Wednesday night, you have to understand what happened Monday night. You have to feel the texture of that first game, the hostility that was woven into every possession, the animosity that had been building between these two rosters for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. The Indiana Fever and the Phoenix Mercury met on Monday, June 22nd, in a regular season contest that felt anything but regular. From the opening tip, this was a game played with clenched fists and gritted teeth. The contact was heavy. The trash talk was constant. The officials were blowing whistles like they were trying to conduct an orchestra made entirely of chaos. By the time the final buzzer sounded, with Indiana walking away with an 86-77 victory, the box score told a story that went far beyond the final margin. 6 technical fouls, 1 ejection, multiple heated exchanges that required teammates and coaches to intervene. This was not a basketball game that happened to get chippy. This was a grudge match between two teams that had reached a boiling point, and the only thing the final buzzer did was pause the hostilities temporarily. Everyone watching that game knew the rematch was going to be volatile. The sports world was buzzing about it. Social media was alive with predictions, with warnings, with fans from both sides drawing battle lines. The narrative was already written before a single player stepped onto the court Wednesday night. This was going to be a war. And what does the WNBA do when it knows a war is coming? What does any responsible sports league do when two teams with documented recent hostility are about to meet again with barely any cooling-off period? You prepare, you assign your most experienced officials, you put the crews on notice. You communicate to both teams that the league is watching, that any escalation will be met with swift and severe consequences. You create a deterrent. That is what should have happened. What actually happened was something so far removed from competent league management that it almost defies belief. What actually happened was that the league sent these two teams back onto the same court, in the same arena with the same unresolved tensions, and then watched as one of their players drove a fist into the throat of the most important athlete in the history of women's basketball while she was lying defenseless on the hardwood. And the referee standing right there, positioned on the baseline with an unobstructed view of the entire sequence, swallowed the whistle. Let us break down exactly what happened because the details matter. They matter enormously. In a situation like this, context is everything, and the context makes this exponentially worse than it might appear in a fleeting glance. It was just past the 3-minute mark of the second quarter. The game was already tense, already physical, already carrying the residual energy of Monday night's hostilities. Caitlin Clark, doing what Caitlin Clark does, drove toward the basket with the ball. She was attacking, pushing the pace, trying to create something for her team in what was shaping up to be a closely contested game. As she drove, her foot caught on the foot of Lexi Hull. It was incidental contact, the kind of thing that happens dozens of times in every basketball game at every level. Clark went down, she hit the floor hard, the ball squirting away from her as she fell. The play, by any reasonable interpretation, was over. The ball was gone. Clark was on the ground, there was nothing to compete for, no loose ball, no contested rebound, no live play requiring continued physical engagement. And this is where it happened. Alyssa Thomas, a veteran player who has been in this league long enough to know exactly what she is doing at every moment on the court, moved toward Clark while she was still on the ground. Not to help her up, not to step around her, not to continue playing the ball because there was no ball to play. Thomas moved toward Clark and with deliberate force drove her closed fist into the area of Clark's neck and throat while Clark was lying flat on the court, completely unable to defend herself. Then Thomas stepped over her. Let that sequence play through your mind one more time. Clark is on the ground, the play is dead, there is no competitive reason for any contact whatsoever. Thomas approaches. Thomas drives a fist into Clark's throat. Thomas steps over her body like she is an obstacle, like she is nothing, like she is not a human being who just had a closed fist shoved into one of the most vulnerable parts of her body. The baseline referee, who was positioned with a direct line of sight to this entire sequence, who could not have been more than 10 to 15 feet away from the action, who had presumably been briefed on the volatility between these two teams, who had presumably watched the footage from Monday Night 6 technical foul war, who had presumably been told to keep this game under control, watched the entire thing unfold and did not blow the whistle. No foul called, no technical assessed, no flagrant reviewed. Nothing. The game continued as if a player had not just assaulted another player while she was defenseless on the floor. And it did not stop there. Reports and additional broadcast angles revealed that Thomas also drove a knee into Clark's groin area during the same sequence. A second act of aggression, a second blow to a player who was already down, a second offense committed in plain view of officials who apparently decided that their whistles were decorative accessories rather than tools of enforcement. The basketball world did not need a second invitation to react. Within approximately 4 minutes of the clip being posted to social media, the internet erupted. And when I say erupted, I do not mean that a few people expressed mild displeasure. I mean that the clip detonated like a digital bomb, sending shockwaves through every corner of the sports world simultaneously. The video spread with the velocity of a wildfire in dry brush. It jumped from platform to platform, from X to Instagram to TikTok to Reddit to YouTube to Facebook, each new share adding fuel to a conflagration that was already burning out of control. Within the first hour, millions of people had seen the clip. Within the first few hours, it was the single most discussed moment in all of sports, across every league, across every country where people consume American athletics. And the reaction was not divided. It was not nuanced. It was not a matter of reasonable people disagreeing about the severity of the contact. The reaction was overwhelming, unanimous, and thunderous in its clarity. This was dirty, this was dangerous, this was unacceptable, and Alyssa Thomas needed to be suspended. Fan after fan, analyst after analyst, commentator after commentator arrived at the same conclusion, each in their own words but all speaking the same fundamental truth. One fan on X wrote, "The refereeing is just out of control in the WNBA. If they're not careful, one of and perhaps the best of their superstars will get seriously hurt." That fan, in their measured concern, was probably being more restrained than the situation warranted. Others were far less diplomatic. Alyssa Thomas is the dirtiest player in the WNBA. She should be in the UFC, not the WNBA, one person posted, capturing a sentiment that was echoing across the digital landscape. Very disappointed in the refs for not calling that intentional attempt to maim, another added, using language that might sound hyperbolic in almost any other context but felt startlingly appropriate given what the world had just witnessed. The additional broadcast angles only intensified the outrage. Drove her knee into Caitlin's groin on this play too. The other broadcast angles showed it, one viewer noted, pointing out details that the initial viral clip had not fully captured. Every new angle, every slow-motion replay, every freeze frame made the situation worse, not better. The more people studied the footage, the more clearly they could see the deliberateness of Thomas's actions, the casual cruelty of the fist to the throat, the dismissive contempt of stepping over Clark's body. The calls for punishment were specific and severe. The WNBA has to look at this and suspend Thomas at least 10 games. Trying to injure another player is one of the more low things you can do. She has to be suspended, one fan demanded. That should be a suspension for Thomas. Dirty player, another declared with the brevity of someone who felt the evidence spoke for itself. But perhaps the most chilling comment, the one that should keep every WNBA executive awake at night, was this. If the league doesn't look at this and find Thomas, there is no question CC should take her talents and run. Read that again. Fans are not merely asking the WNBA to discipline a player. They are telling the league in plain and unambiguous terms that if it cannot protect Caitlin Clark, she should leave. She should walk away. She should take the astronomical talent that has single-handedly transformed this league's cultural relevance, its television ratings, its attendance figures, its social media engagement, its merchandise sales, its private jet travel, its network broadcast deals, and she should take all of it somewhere else. That is not a threat. That is a prognosis. That is the fan base telling the WNBA exactly what will happen if this pattern of neglect continues. And every single person in that league office should be taking it with deadly seriousness. In the cacophony of reactions, one voice cut through the noise with the authority that only comes from lived experience at the highest level of basketball. Reggie Miller, a basketball Hall of Famer, one of the most prolific shooters and fiercest competitors in the history of the NBA, a man who spent his career navigating the brutal physicality of 1990s professional basketball, weighed in with a clarity and force that silenced any remaining debate. Miller knows what physical basketball looks like. He played through an era when hand-checking was legal, when flagrant fouls were sometimes just called common fouls, when the paint was a war zone and the elbows flew freely. He played in Madison Square Garden against the New York Knicks with 18,000 hostile fans screaming for his head on every possession, and he thrived. He smiled. He made the shot. He held up his hands and counted off the points while an entire city seethed. Reggie Miller is not a man who is easily shocked by physicality on a basketball court, and Reggie Miller was shocked by what Alyssa Thomas did. Miller, who has developed a genuine and warm relationship with Caitlin Clark through their shared broadcasting duties on NBC's Basketball Night in America earlier in the 2026 season, did not mince words. He did not couch his criticism in diplomatic language. He did not offer the kind of carefully balanced analysis designed to avoid offending anyone. He called it what it was: dangerous, deliberate, a cheap shot against a defenseless player, an act that crossed the line from competitive basketball into something far darker and more troubling. Miller's message was devastating in its simplicity. This is not toughness. This is not physicality. This is not what it means to play hard-nosed basketball. What Alyssa Thomas did to Caitlin Clark while she was on the ground, after the play was over with the ball nowhere in sight, was a cheap shot by every definition of the word. And in any league that claims to care about its players, about its product, about its integrity, about its future, that action cannot go unpunished. When Reggie Miller, a man who lived inside the most physical era of professional basketball, a man who was grabbed and shoved and fouled hard for 2 decades and never once complained about legitimate physicality, tells you that something crossed a line, then that line has been crossed so far behind that you cannot even see it anymore. That is the end of the conversation. There is no counter-argument. There is no, well, basketball is a physical sport defense that survives Reggie Miller looking into a camera and saying this was wrong. As if the fist to the throat were not sufficient evidence of the league's officiating failure, the game provided a second exhibit for the prosecution. Later in the contest, Clark was subjected to a reckless closeout, the kind of play that has ended careers, that has torn ligaments, that has turned dynamic athletes into cautionary tales about what happens when defenders land on offensive players' feet. This time, the officials actually reviewed the play. They went to the monitor. They watched the replay. They had the opportunity, the technology, and the authority to upgrade the foul to a flagrant and send a message that this kind of dangerous play would not be tolerated. And they declined. They watched the replay, saw a defender's foot come down on top of Clark's foot in a manner that could have caused catastrophic injury, and decided that it did not warrant a flagrant foul. Stephanie White, in her masterful post-game press conference, described this with a metaphor that was both perfect and damning. To me, that's like a do-over on a test. How do you screw it up again? How indeed. The officials were given a second chance to get it right. They had already missed the fist to the throat, already failed to protect Clark on the most egregious play of the night. And when the game presented them with another opportunity, another moment where they could have reasserted control, could have demonstrated that player safety matters, could have signaled to both teams that the escalation had to stop, they failed again. 2 chances, 2 failures, 1 player paying the price for all of it. In the third quarter, Caitlin Clark left the game with what the team described as an apparent back injury. She did not return. The most electric, most marketable, most transformative player in the history of women's professional basketball was removed from a nationally televised game because her body had absorbed too much punishment that the officials had refused to penalize. The Fever later confirmed that Clark would not return. Head coach Stephanie White indicated that the team would be cautious with Clark's health, noting that it is a long season and that protecting their franchise players' well-being took priority over any single game. A long season. Think about that phrase. A long season that now includes a list of incidents that grows with alarming regularity. A long season during which the league's most valuable asset has been subjected to treatment that would prompt immediate suspensions in any other professional sports league on the planet. A long season that could be cut short at any moment by an injury caused not by the natural physicality of basketball, but by the deliberate, targeted aggression of opponents who have learned that the officials will not protect Caitlin Clark, and the league office will not hold aggressors accountable. The Fever got what they feared most: their superstar gone from the game, not because of a legitimate basketball play, not because of incidental contact, not because of the kind of wear and tear that every athlete accepts as part of the deal, but because a veteran player drove a fist into her throat while she was on the ground, because another player landed on her foot in a reckless closeout, because the officials standing right there watched it all happen and responded with the urgency of spectators rather than arbitrators. We have been critical of Stephanie White on this platform. We have questioned her clock management in crucial late-game situations. We have second-guessed her rotations when they seem to prioritize lineup experimentation over winning. We have pointed out instances where she failed to use her coach's challenges in moments that cried out for review. Those critiques were offered honestly and we believe fairly. But on this night, Stephanie White was magnificent. She walked into the post-game press conference carrying the righteous fury of a coach who had just watched her best player be targeted, assaulted, and ultimately removed from a game while the officials stood by and did nothing. She did not equivocate. She did not hedge. She did not offer the kind of carefully worded non-answers that coaches often deploy when they are worried about fines from the league office. Stephanie White chose her player over her wallet, and she did it without a moment's hesitation. "I just saw it," White said, referring to the Thomas fist to the throat incident. I'm not sure if it had any impact on her health or not, but it was egregious. The fact that it was a no call, I heard about it at halftime. I brought it to the attention of the officials at halftime, yet we still had 11 fouls in the fourth quarter to their 2. They still shot 24 free throws in the second half. White was not merely complaining about one missed call, she was indicting an entire system. She was pointing out a pattern so blatant that it almost seemed intentional. Her team's best player had a fist driven into her throat, and when she brought it to the officials' attention at halftime, the second half was officiated even more lopsidedly against her team. 11 fouls to 2 in the fourth quarter. 24 free throws for Phoenix in the second half. That is not a random distribution of calls. That is a message, and the message was, complain all you want, we are going to do what we are going to do. Number 1, you got to call it. White continued, her voice carrying the controlled intensity of someone who is choosing every word carefully because she knows the world is listening. It's absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. And then number 2, you're aware of what happened 2 nights ago and that still happens? Absolutely unacceptable. That second point is perhaps the most devastating critique of all. The league knew, the officials knew, everyone knew that Monday night's game had been a powder keg, everyone knew that Wednesday night carried the potential for escalation. And knowing all of that, the officials still failed to prevent a player from driving a fist into another player's throat. They were warned, they were prepared, they had every reason to be vigilant, and they still failed. White was not finished. The fist in the throat is crazy, it's crazy. It's dangerous. The landing spot when you went to review it and she still comes down on top of another foot, I don't know, because to me that's like a do-over on a test. How do you screw it up again? When you have these things continue to happen time and time again, eventually it gets frustrating. And then her closing statement, the one that landed like a hammer on an anvil. We have a generational talent and a WNBA superstar who had 2 cheap shots in this game that weren't called. I can say it again, absolutely unacceptable. 2 cheap shots, not 1, 2, and neither was called. In a game that the entire sports world was watching with heightened attention because of what had happened 48 hours earlier. In a game where the officials had been put on notice. In a game where the league's credibility was already on thin ice. Stephanie White did not just defend her player that night. She fired a flare into the sky for the entire world to see. And the light from that flare illuminated something that can no longer be ignored. One of the most insightful observations about this entire situation came not from a basketball analyst but from a cultural commentator who drew a parallel that perfectly captures the stakes involved. She reminds me of Tiger Woods for golf, the commentator said. He changed the paycheck. That comparison is not hyperbole. It is, if anything, an understatement of what Caitlin Clark has meant to the WNBA. Tiger Woods did not merely play golf at an extraordinary level. He transformed the entire economic ecosystem of professional golf. Purses exploded, television deals multiplied, corporate sponsorships flowed in at rates the sport had never imagined. Tiger Woods made everyone around him richer, more famous, more relevant simply by being on the course. Caitlin Clark has done the same thing for the WNBA, and arguably more because the WNBA's starting point was so much lower than the PGA Tours. Before Clark, WNBA teams were flying commercial. Now they fly private. Before Clark, WNBA games were broadcast on secondary cable channels that most fans had to search for. Now they are on major network television. Before Clark, WNBA attendance was respectable but unspectacular. Now arenas are selling out. Before Clark, WNBA merchandise was a niche market. Now it is a mainstream revenue stream. Every single player in the WNBA, including Alyssa Thomas, is benefiting from Caitlin Clark's presence in the league. Every paycheck is bigger. Every endorsement deal is more lucrative. Every private plane flight, every first-class hotel room, every nationally televised game is made possible in whole or in significant part by the attention and revenue that Caitlin Clark has brought to women's professional basketball. And yet some of those very same players who are directly and measurably benefiting from Clark's existence in their league, are targeting her with the kind of physical aggression that could end her career. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The self-destructive stupidity of it is almost beyond comprehension. Imagine a scenario in which a PGA Tour player deliberately tried to injure Tiger Woods during the height of Tiger's dominance. Not trash talk, not gamesmanship, deliberately tried to cause physical harm to the player who was responsible for doubling every purse on the tour. The golf world would have erupted. The player would have been banned. The sponsors would have demanded action. The tour would have moved with the speed and decisiveness of an organization that understood exactly what was at stake. The WNBA apparently does not yet understand what is at stake, or if it does, it has so far been unwilling to act accordingly. Either explanation is damning. It is exceedingly rare in modern sports media for everyone to agree on anything. The nature of sports commentary, the economic incentives of contrarianism, the tribal loyalties of fan bases, all of these factors conspire to ensure that virtually every significant event produces a spectrum of opinions. Someone will always play devil's advocate. Someone will always find the contrarian angle. Someone will always argue the other side, not this time. The media response to the Thomas cheap shot was as close to unanimous as anything this observer has ever witnessed in the sports discourse. Outkick's John Root called it insane that the WNBA allows its most important player to be treated like literal garbage. Barstool Sports founder Dave Portnoy called it a brutal cheap shot and declared that the play was flagrant whether the whistle blew or not. Former WNBA star Stacey Dales called it pathetic and demanded a league review. When Dave Portnoy, Stacey Dales, Reggie Miller, Outkick, Barstool Sports, and mainstream sports journalists are all saying the exact same thing, when there is not a single credible voice in the entire sports media landscape willing to defend what happened, the league should recognize that this is not a matter of opinion. This is a matter of fact. This is a moment of consensus so complete that ignoring it would constitute an act of willful self-destruction. It would be one thing if this were an isolated incident. If Alyssa Thomas's cheap shot existed in a vacuum, if it were a single unfortunate moment in an otherwise well-officiated, well-managed league, the response could be proportionally contained. Discipline Thomas, retrain the official, move on, but this is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern. A deeply troubling, increasingly dangerous, and maddeningly persistent pattern of officiating failures that have, time and again, left Caitlin Clark unprotected on the court. Game after game, season after season since Clark entered the league, the same story has repeated itself with numbing regularity. Clark drives to the basket and absorbs contact that goes uncalled. Clark is shoved on screens that the officials ignore. Clark is grabbed, held, pushed, and fouled in ways that are visible from the upper deck but apparently invisible to the referees standing 15 feet away. And on the occasions when the officiating failures are so egregious that they cannot be denied, when the video evidence is so clear that silence is no longer an option, the league responds with the minimum possible action and then returns to business as usual. This pattern has created a permission structure. It has taught opposing players that there is a different set of rules when it comes to Caitlin Clark. It has communicated, through inaction and underreaction, that you can be more physical with Clark than with other players and face fewer consequences. It has created an environment in which a player like Alyssa Thomas can drive a fist into Clark's throat while she is lying on the ground and reasonably expect to get away with it, because the league's track record suggests that getting away with it is exactly what will happen. That permission structure is not just unfair. It is dangerous. It is the kind of systemic failure that does not merely risk injury. It virtually guarantees it. When players learn that aggressive, targeted physicality against a specific opponent will not be penalized, they escalate. Human nature dictates this. The boundary that is not enforced ceases to function as a boundary, and the only thing that stops the escalation is either intervention by the authorities or injury to the target. The WNBA has so far chosen not to intervene. Which means the other outcome, the one no one wants to talk about but everyone can see coming, becomes more likely with every passing game. Here it is, the question that sits at the center of this entire controversy like a stone in a pond, sending ripples in every direction. Is the WNBA willing to sacrifice Caitlin Clark? Not intentionally, not consciously. No one in the league office is sitting in a conference room saying, let's allow our most important player to be injured. But through inaction, through inadequate officiating, through insufficient penalties, through a failure to create and enforce a meaningful deterrent against targeted aggression, the league is functionally accepting the risk that Clark will be seriously injured. And the consequences of that injury, should it occur, would be catastrophic. Not just for Clark, not just for the Fever, for the entire league, for every player whose paycheck has grown because of Clark's presence, for every franchise that is selling out arenas for the first time, for every television network that has invested millions in WNBA broadcasting rights, for every corporate sponsor that has attached its brand to the league's rising profile. All of it, every dollar, every viewer, every sold-out arena, every private plane flight, all of it is built on a foundation that includes, as one of its most critical load-bearing pillars, the health and continued participation of Caitlin Clark. Remove that pillar and the entire structure is at risk. The WNBA is playing with fire, and the people who will get burned are not the executives who failed to act. They will move on to other jobs, other industries, other opportunities. The people who will get burned are the players, the ones whose careers and livelihoods depend on a league that is currently treating its most valuable asset with a recklessness that borders on the incomprehensible. The path forward is not complicated. It does not require a committee. It does not require a study. It does not require months of deliberation. It requires the same thing that every responsible sports league has demonstrated the capacity to deliver when the situation demands it: decisive action. First, Alyssa Thomas must be suspended, not fined, suspended. A fine is a cost of doing business for a veteran player earning a professional salary. A fine communicates that the league disapproves but does not consider the offense serious enough to impose a meaningful consequence. A suspension communicates that the league will not tolerate deliberate aggression against defenseless players, period. The suspension must be significant, not one game, not 2 games. A suspension that makes every player in the league think twice before targeting Caitlin Clark or anyone else. A suspension that creates a genuine deterrent. A suspension that sends a message so loud and so clear that it cannot be misinterpreted or ignored. Second, the officiating must improve. The baseline referee who watched Thomas drive a fist into Clark's throat and did nothing must be held accountable. The officials who reviewed the reckless closeout on the monitor and declined to upgrade it must be held accountable. Accountability does not mean a private conversation. It means reassignment, retraining, or removal. The officials who are consistently failing to protect players must face consequences commensurate with their failures. Third, the league must issue a public statement, not a vague corporate platitude about player safety. A specific, detailed acknowledgement that what happened to Caitlin Clark on June 24, 2026 was unacceptable, that the officiating failed, and that the league is taking concrete steps to ensure it does not happen again. Transparency is not optional in a moment like this. The fans, the players, the sponsors, and the media are all watching, and they will not be satisfied with silence or equivocation. Fourth, and most importantly, the WNBA must recognize that protecting Caitlin Clark is not favoritism. It is self-preservation. It is the recognition that every organization has an obligation to protect the assets that make its existence possible. No one accused the NBA of favoritism when it protected Michael Jordan, LeBron James, or Stephen Curry from excessive physicality. No one accused the NFL of favoritism when it implemented rules to protect franchise quarterbacks. These are not acts of preferential treatment. They are acts of institutional responsibility. The WNBA must extend that same responsibility to Caitlin Clark, not because she is more important as a human being than any other player, but because the health of the league, the growth trajectory that has transformed women's professional basketball into a mainstream cultural force, the economic prosperity that is lifting every player, every team, and every stakeholder in the ecosystem, all of it depends on the league's ability to demonstrate that it can govern itself competently and protect its participants from harm. We have arrived at a crossroads, not a metaphorical one. A literal, concrete, unavoidable crossroads that the WNBA must navigate in the coming days and weeks. Down one path lies accountability, reform, and the continued growth of a league that has captivated the sports world in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Down that path, Alyssa Thomas is suspended. The officiating is reformed. The message is sent, loudly and unequivocally, that the WNBA will protect its players, all of its players, and that deliberate aggression against defenseless athletes will be met with consequences severe enough to function as a genuine deterrent. Down the other path lies something much darker. Down that path, the league issues a tepid fine, or worse, does nothing at all. The officials continue to swallow their whistles. The pattern of targeted aggression against Caitlin Clark continues and escalates. And one night on some court in some arena in front of cameras that are broadcasting to millions of viewers, something happens that cannot be undone. An injury, a career-altering, legacy-defining, league-damaging injury that everyone saw coming and no one did enough to prevent. That second path is not hypothetical. It is not alarmist. It is the logical and inevitable destination of the road the WNBA is currently traveling. Every incident that goes unpunished, every cheap shot that goes uncalled, every review that fails to upgrade a foul, every post-game press conference in which a head coach has to beg for basic player protection, each of these is a step further down a road that ends in a place where no one wants to arrive. Caitlin Clark is a generational talent. She is a transformative figure. She is the single most important player in the history of women's professional basketball, and that is not hyperbole. It is a statement supported by every measurable metric of cultural impact, economic growth, and competitive excellence. She deserves the protection that every league extends to its most important athletes. She deserves to play basketball without wondering whether the next trip to the floor will result in a fist to her throat. She deserves officials who will enforce the rules. She deserves a league office that will impose meaningful consequences on players who target her with deliberate aggression. She deserves better than what happened on June 24, 2026. The question is not whether the WNBA knows this. Everyone knows this. The question is whether the WNBA will act on it, whether the league will summon the courage, the integrity, and the institutional will to do what must be done. Whether the people in charge will look at the footage, listen to the outrage, read the statements from Hall of Famers and coaches and fans and analysts and former players, and decide that this is the moment they stop failing and start leading. The sports world is watching. The fans are watching. The sponsors are watching. The players are watching. History is watching. The WNBA has a choice to make, and the stakes have never been higher. Should Alyssa Thomas be suspended? For how many games? Does the WNBA's officiating crisis put Caitlin Clark's career at genuine risk? We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts. This conversation is far from over, and we are not going anywhere until the WNBA gives its brightest star the protection she has earned and deserves. Subscribe, share, stay informed, because when the league won't speak up, someone has to.